Okay, I'm not sure how far we're going to get in this one. So, welcome back to my live stream about putting together a plugin for Pinegrow. So, Pinegrow is a web editor for those of you who don't know. It allows you to visually build pages. However, importantly, it doesn't disturb the code. So you can look at the code, you can look at the HTML, you can look at the CSS. If you're putting together a WordPress theme, you can look at the PHP. So it's a really powerful editor that is great for developers. It's great for people who don't mind getting their hands a little dirty with code, that don't necessarily want to just write code and like to have the ability to put things together visually. And so what we're doing in this particular tutorial series is looking at how we can add plugins to Pinegrow to extend its functionality. And in particular, in this series, we're looking at how to add versioning. So we are adding GitHub versioning directly into Pinegrow so you don't have to leave. So obviously as a developer you have the ability to either access GitHub through the command line. You can use GitHub desktop. There's a lot of different ways that you could access GitHub. But in this case, it's kind of nice not to leave the tool that you're using at the time. It's good to be able to just jump right in and version whatever it is you're working on from within the program that you're working on, from the app, from the Pinegrow app. So we're going to look at that. So when we left off last time, if we just go back over here to Pinegrow, make that big. So we have our GitHub menu that we've added to the page. We have two different menu items, and we might revisit this, that are present at all times when we open it for creating a repo or cloning a repo. And then we also have our settings. So within our settings, we have a username and a personal account token. We haven't done anything so what we've done so far is given this modal the ability to save this username and personal account token to local storage. And in Pinegrow, it runs on NWJS, which is a Node sort of browser mix-up. So the local storage stays on through quits and restarts of the actual program. So we have three different things down here. We added some error messages in here, but we haven't hooked these error messages up. One thing that I did since the last video, so in the last video, embarrassingly, I had this as a text input. I have now changed it from type text to type password, which means that my personal account token is now nicely hidden. And I will cover that in just 1 second. And now when I shoot these videos, everybody doesn't see it. I guess we can just leave that on. The only thing that I would like to do is implement a toggle, a checkbox, I guess, that will then show this so that people can see it in plain text when they're putting it in. So what we want to do right now is we covered a little bit of using OctoKit, which is the JavaScript interface to the GitHub API to authenticate, to basically submit this personal account token and then get back either an error indicating that it is not a valid token, or confirmation along with some data that we can then mine. And so what we want to do now is we want to finish up the settings so that when we're calling out to that function to authenticate, that it passes back some information about whether or not we should turn off the token error message, or the username error message, as well as turning this back to green when there's a success. I think that's about it. We'll see as we get into it. Okay, so let's switch back now to our actual code. I guess what we'll do is we'll first go to our modal. So here's our modal. Right now we have a form, and that form has two inputs. One is a form group that takes the username, so GitHub-user-name. The other is the GitHub token. So let me just quickly bring something else up for my own self. I'm going to close this down. Sorry about this. Just checking on my stream status and trying to get back to another page. There we go. So bring up the modal. Okay. So I'm in the wrong. All right. So right now, again, we have these two different groups. What we're going to want to do is add a third group. So we've got two choices. We can either type it in here or create it in Pinegrow and then copy it over. I guess we're just going to type it into here. Or, yeah, I guess. No, that's going to take too long. So we're going to go back over into Pinegrow, File, Open Project. So now we can open this index again. This is how we put together that modal. So what we're going to want to do next is go ahead and put another form element in. Go to our library, go down to the forms. We're going to want a checkbox group. Let's put that right there. Are we still in the form? Yes. No. So this needs to go in one. Okay, so now that's within our form. Now that particular label, we can go ahead and edit that. So we're going to want something like, I don't know why it added all that extra space. So this is just going to be a checkbox. Remember, I changed the personal account token to now be a password field. That means that when you display it and when you input it, it's just going to show the dots instead of the actual password itself. So we're now changing that over to show token. And then the other thing we want to do, let's open this up. So we've got the actual ID. We should give this some form of sensible ID. So let's say GitHub show token. Okay, so now we've got a unique ID. Is there anything else we want here? Let's just take a look at the code real quick. So we've got input, option 1, show token. That kind of bothers me that instead of having a label, yeah, I don't like that at all, actually. Let's go ahead and delete that out. I'm just going to put some new code in here. Label. 4 equal to token. 1 second. Wife's coming home. That's all well and good. And then we're going to say show token. Let's move the input before it. All right, I like that better. Guess that's okay. We don't actually need the value. But still, doesn't hurt. All right, so now we have this. Let's do, damn it. Let's do one other thing. Let's add an ID to this. I mean, to do it correctly, we would go ahead and hit it here and then give it an ID of GH token reveal. So this ID is going to allow us to target this and grab the value later. So the other, or actually style it. The other thing that I think we want to do is let's add one more div below this. Let's put it within the form. And then within that div, let's put a span. So the other thing that I want is for people when they the user when they come back to this modal, I want them to be quickly able to see whether or not their credentials have been authenticated, so they don't have to sort of save it again and recheck the credentials. So let's enter the text first. So let's give it something like these credentials are valid. So these credentials are valid. Let's give it a class logged in. So now we can hit that for styling, just like we did for the error. And let's give it an ID. I don't know. Correct. Credentials. So now we have an ID so we can easily target it, as well as a class for logged in. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and save it. That was weird. And then let's see. So what did we had this one. Had this code right here that we did. So now we'll go back to our project. So remember, this is just how we designed our modal, but the actual snippet of HTML that we're loading in is this one here. The main difference being that there's no head to it really. And so right now it looks awfully funny, but remember, when we bring it into Pinegrow, Pinegrow is running Bootstrap 3, and so all of the Bootstrap 3 styles will be applied to this. So now we can just go down here, go ahead and paste that in, and now we have our two other things. So the other item that we want to do is we want this logged in class to have a color. So, and we also want to, unless it's actually been checked, we don't want to show this. We want to hide it. So we're going to do another style up here. So logged in. And we're going to say color green and hidden. So actually, right at the beginning, we actually want the two, the username and the personal account token error messages to be hidden. Before I just had that set to visible so we could see them. Let's go ahead and change that now to hidden. So the other thing that I've been thinking about is we want, basically we need both the username and the personal account token to be added in. Basically we want those form areas to be required. So we didn't do that before, so let's do that now. So in order to make those required, all we have to do is add that attribute. So we go down to the input. So this is the input for the, we can do this in the tree. So if we look in the, where the hell, oh, here's the tree. Actually, Pinegrow is choking on this because it doesn't have a head, so it's a little confused. So what we can do is just with this input down here, we could add the attribute here. So now that is required. We want to do the same with the input for the same for the password for our GitHub token. Sorry, not. So basically, I realized I talked about this, but I haven't said anything. So notice that the username input is type of text. The password or the personal account token input class I've now changed to a type of password. That means that when we type it in, it's instead of showing us the actual characters, is just going to show us those dots, those circles, to hide our password. So again, let's make this required. So that's going to take one level of error checking out for us, because this means that it's not going to allow us to submit this unless both those fields are filled out. So we don't have to do that error checking on the back end. Okay, so now we've got our new modal. So what we can do is go ahead and reload the app. Just 1 second here. Now if we go to this, go to settings. Now we can see that there's a show token. We can toggle it. The error messages have gone away. If we hit save settings, nothing seems to happen, but there's stuff happening behind the scenes. Okay, so let's go back and fill that in. Let's jump back to our code editor. Okay, so I can close this down, reopen the actual main body of the plugin. So let's just remind ourselves. So basically, once we load the menu in, we have our settings modal that's loaded here. So we say add settings modal, and this is an asynchronous function because we want to fetch this HTML fragment in, and we don't want to start targeting the settings fields until that's loaded in. So we made this async, and we're using an await here. So that's going to mean that our JavaScript is paused basically until this entire fragment is, or until this function gives back, returns the HTML that we're adding to the page. Okay, so then once we get that back, we go to manipulate settings field. So if we look at this manipulate settings field function, first thing that we do is we get our form field for the username. I'm not actually sure that's the correct ID. Oh yeah, it is. GitHub username, GitHub token, GitHub show token. Okay. So we get the two form elements for our username and token. We also get the 3 buttons so that we can put click events on them. So the first thing we do once this is called is we go out to local storage and we look to see if the username has been set. And let's just make sure that that's actually remove item, set item. Yeah. So we see if that's set. If that is set, then we assume that both the username and the token have been set. And so we grab those and set them equal to the value of our username field and our account token field. So we populate our form, our settings modal, with the stored values. So part of me is trying to decide whether or not this is a great way to do it, because again, I'm wondering if we're changing projects, are we going to want to also have the ability to, when we change the project, to change automatically the GitHub credentials? So in other words, if you're working on one project in your personal portfolio and one project in a client portfolio, do you want different GitHub credentials? Do we want that automatically added in? Or are we going to require the user to simply go in and change the settings each time they load a new project? So for right now, we're just going to stick with local storage. If we have to, and I think later we're going to want to write a sort of a project-specific JSON file. And at that point, once we write the function for that, we might incorporate our username and our settings token into that JSON file so that we can set the username and token on a per project basis. Okay, at any point. So now once we have that done, sort of a setup, we then add event listeners for the clear button, the save button, and the cancel button. And right now, if we hit clear settings, basically it removes the 2 stored items and also make sure to clear out the values within the 2 form fields. If we hit save, it sets the local storage to whatever the user has put into the 2 form, and then it goes out to verify whether or not those are valid. And that's what we're going to work on right next. And then finally, the cancel is going to basically not do much except for make sure that if we have set the button up here to button success, if we still had this uncommented, then we want to make sure that when we hit cancel that it sets this back to button primary as opposed to button success, so that next time we open the modal, we know that we still have to go back in and validate our settings. All right, so let's go down and work on the verify GitHub account function. So that's down here at the bottom. So right now it's set as an asynchronous function, and that's because we want to make sure we're going out to an API. We're going to the GitHub API using octokit.users.getAuthenticated, and I talked about that a little bit last time. That basically just says if this octokit is logged in, pass us back some information on the user that is logged in. And we don't know how long that's going to take. That's going to be dependent on, how long it takes our internet connection to get to the GitHub internet connection, pass it a header, do a little negotiation, retrieve the data, then send it back to us. So that's going to take a little while. So we put in a wait on there to make sure that it wasn't going to do anything, or the script wasn't going to progress until we got that info back. So now let's kind of work with that. So right now, like I said, we're doing this as an await. And there's a couple different ways that you can pause your JavaScript progression in order to get back some information from something like an API. There's also a couple of different ways you can do error control. So right now, we've got this wrapped in a try-catch. So what try-catch does is, first it tries to do the things within this try block. So if this fails, the octokit users.getAuthenticated, if that fails, if we don't get a viable response back from that, for example, if the token is wrong, then basically it's going to kick it out to this catch, and then we're going to log that error. We're just going to output that error and say that that's, not a good, something went wrong. So this isn't a bad way to do it, but the thing is, we want to do a couple of things once we get this response back. So this is authenticated, or excuse me, get authenticated is going to return back to us, if the person is logged in, a data block. That data block is going to contain a number of different bits of information. One of the key bits of information is it's going to return to us a login name. So what we want to do is we want to basically first check whether or not the token that we're checking here is valid. So if we actually get a response that's not, well, we should look at, I suppose we should look at the, where is that? Sorry, 1 second. Let's look. I'm going to have to wrap it up pretty soon too. Is this going to work? So many windows. Events. No, that's not right. Okay, refs. Doesn't really work. Damn. No. I want the actual, maybe it's this one? Not really. This sort, oh yeah, here we go. well, this isn't the exact one, but it'll work. So basically, once we make our request, and we're not making this request, user repos, we're just looking for an authenticated user. There's a couple things we could get back. We could get back a status 200 and then a bunch of data. Or we could get something like this, a status 304, or a status 401, or a status 403. So if we get back either of these two, a 401 or a 403, we want to catch that and basically pass back to the settings window that the token isn't valid. On the other hand, if we do get a response back, we want to go ahead and check the data payload that GitHub delivered back to us to see if the username that we're retrieving here from local storage matches the login name that's within the data. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that. So at any point to do this, I feel a little more comfortable rather than doing a try catch and working with some promises or working more directly with sort of the async await. I think I want to instead change some promises. So let's get rid of this. And where are we at? Blue. So we want to stay within this if block to check for these two items. So we've got our OctaKit that's instantiated. And now within this, what we're going to do is return to our settings modal where we called this verify GitHub account a value. So there's three cases. Best case scenario is that the token is valid and the username that we've got stored matches the data that we get back from the token. So if we get that, we're going to return true. Next case scenario is that the token is valid, but the username doesn't match. So we need to pass something for that. I think in this case, we're going to pass a value of -1. Okay, so that's distinctly different than the true that we're passing for the passing for both the token being valid and the username being valid. And then the final is if the token just is not good. And so in that case, let's go ahead and pass back undefined. So we've got three values: true, -1, and undefined. Okay, so we're going to return something. So we're going to say return. And we're going to, once again, ping out to OctaKit that will send a request to the GitHub API to check if our token is good. So we're going to say OctaKit users get authenticated. So at that point, once we get that, remember we had that before as an await. Once we get that, we're going to chain that. So this, as soon as we hit then, as soon as we put this .then to chain the thing that came before it, basically we're turning the thing that came before it into a promise. And so again, it's going to pause, much like await did, the whole flow until we get back what came up here, the get authenticated. So then we're going to say then, and I'm going to use some ES6 arrow just because I think it's a lot clearer. So then we're going to get back a payload, and I'm just going to give this a variable name. Actually, I don't think maybe that's quite the right name, but basically what we're doing is we're passing the result of our request out to octakit.users.getAuthenticated into isAuthenticated and passing it into our next function. So we're going to say then run a function with that data, the isAuthenticated data, and what we want to return back is whether or not our isAuthenticated data or isAuthenticated payload has a within that object, if there's something called data, and then we want to grab the value of the, if the data exists, then grab the value of the login. So I'll show you in a second, or we can take a look at what the overall structure is, I guess. But for right now, just know that the get authenticated is going to pass a bunch of different data back, one of which is a key of data that's going to contain an object, and one of the keys within the data object is login. That's going to be the login name. So now we have, once we get that name, we now want to see if that is equal to the username. So we're going to say then. So we're just, again, walking through. We're saying we want to get this. Once that is fulfilled, then we want to get this. Once that is fulfilled, then we want to do the next thing. So we're going to say something like return name. So this is actually the username for that particular, that's associated with that token that we entered. And so then we're going to use a ternary if to return the next value. So we're going to say, does the return name deeply equal the username? So I deliberately put them in this order rather than say, does the username equal the return name? And that's because if you make a mistake and you forget, and instead of hitting 3 equals here, you hit 1 equals, you'll accidentally reassign the variable username with the value of return name, and that's not what we want. We want to compare them, so we're using a deep comparison with 3 equals here. So if that actually is true, right, then we want to return one of 2 values. If it's true, we want to return true. So that means our token is good and our username is good. If that doesn't match, then we want to return -1. We want to set basically our next value as -1. And so again, that's going to say token is good, but whatever username you entered doesn't match. So now the final thing that we want to do, so we're going to return that to our settings modal where it was called when we hit the submit button. So right now it's either going to submit true or -1. We want it to submit undefined if there's a failure. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a little bit of error policing. This probably could be developed a little bit more later on, but right now we're just going to say catch, which is sort of like in the try catch block, and we're going to say if there's an error, then we want to just console log it. So just as an aside, console error versus console log, both of them go to a standard out, but you can, if you want, define the console log output as different from the standard console error log put. For example, the console error can always go to some file so you can look it up later. Right now, I haven't changed the standard out, so it defaults to the console. So console error in this case is essentially the same as console log. All right. So now, basically, that is going to check our authentication and then pass back one of 3 values: true, -1, or if this fails, undefined back to our settings. So now we have to do something with that back in our settings. So let's go back up there to this one, manipulate settings field. So right here is where we called that. All right. So clear, save. So let's go to the save. Let's work on the save first. So once we call that, we need to now change the look of the settings modal based on what we get back from that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set this equal to some variable. So we're going to say let the error check equal this. Now the next thing that's important here is we don't want to proceed until we get this value back, and again this might take some time, so we're just going to put an await on here. But remember, awaits only work in asynchronous functions, so we need to make that into an asynchronous function. So now we're setting the error check based on this function, and that's going to return true, -1, or undefined. So we need to change our response based on whatever we get back. So we're going to say, so if true is equal to our error check, if true is equal to our error check, then we're going to want to change our settings button to have that green. So we're going to set the class name on that to button-success. Let's go ahead and close that out. What else are we going to want to do? So we're going to want to make sure that our 2 error messages are hidden. So we're going to say document get element by ID, and then GitHub username error. Man. So just thinking about it. So we're going to want to change the visibility with our save settings. We're going to want to change the visibility of the error message with our clear button. And I guess also with our cancel button. So let's set this to a variable so that we only have to search for it once. So let's go back up here. So we'll grab that there. So that means that let the token error message get element by ID equal to the what's that error? Token error. So that way we don't have to search the DOM for each button. And then we should do one more for this one, the correct credentials. And my wife is home. All right, so we have all those set up as variables. So my dogs are going crazy, so I think we're going to stop there. But in the next video, what we're going to do is, again, set up if, else, checking for the variable that got, the value got passed back, and then toggle each of these in response to what's going on with those. So until next time, have fun programming. I'm not going to upload these changes as a branch until I finish off the next lesson. Just want to remind everyone, this is not a actual authenticated Pinegrow associated set of videos. Even though I work for Pinegrow, this is something I'm doing completely on my own. But I do welcome feedback within the Pinegrow forum if you don't understand something, if you want some extra feedback. I think sooner or later I'm going to set up a separate, maybe a Facebook account for people to submit questions. But at any point, until next time, just, have fun putting this together. If you want to submit something on GitHub, please feel free. And please, please, please subscribe and leave a comment so that I know that somebody out there is getting something useful out of this. I see viewers, but nobody really comments, so don't know what you want, don't know if you're liking this or just sort of looking out of purient interest. So let me know. Thanks a lot, everyone.